In the documentary about The Last Jedi, titled The Director and Jedi, the film's producer, Ram Bergman, stated that he was happy, quote, "It was a Rian Johnson film, not just a hired gun." It got me wondering, what exactly is a Rian Johnson film? He has 5 movies under his belt: Brick, Brothers Bloom, Looper, Star Wars, and Knives Out. All of them have a clear voice and vision. He wrote and directed all of them. He's trying to say something. I just don't know what it is. And I want to find out.
Many directors have signifiers. Tim Burton has his moody goths. Hayao Miyazaki has airplanes. Wes Anderson has a lot. But I don't think many people could tell you what Rian Johnson's are, despite the fact that he's one of the more well-known up-and-coming directors. Even his contemporaries, like Edgar Wright or Taika Waititi, have a much more pronounced style than Johnson.
Before I get started, I want to note that filmmaking is an inherently collaborative effort. Rian Johnson does not make these alone. Steve Yedlin is a cinematographer in all 5 films. Ram Bergman produces all 5 films. Noah Sagan and Joseph Gordon-Levitt appear in all of them to varying capacities, sometimes starring, sometimes cameos. Nathan Johnson, his cousin, composes 4 of the 5 films, the only one not being Star Wars, which was composed by John Williams. Anyway, I'm going to be referring to these as Rian Johnson movies, and just know that isn't the whole truth. No artist would ignore the voices of the people that he's hired. Brick is a 2005 hard-boiled detective story set in a California high school. It was made for basically no money, and all that money came from family and friends. It was shot in just 20 days.
Brennan, played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, is contacted by his ex-girlfriend, Emily, saying she's scared and needs his help. But by the time he's able to track her down, he finds her already dead. Brennan then investigates the drug ring she found herself caught up in order to find out who caused her death.
As I mentioned, it's a real Dashiell Hammett-esque, hard-boiled detective story, full of femme fatales, made-up words, stock criminals, and just no one acting the way real humans do, but like in the best way. It didn't make a lot of money, but it made back its budget, and it made its rounds in the film critic circles. Rian Johnson was getting his name out there. He finally was getting the chance to produce a slightly bigger budget movie, and he chooses a Wes Anderson caper film? The Brothers Bloom is a 2008 heist comedy film that does have a lot of Wes Anderson energy to it, with its quirky protagonist, its fatal love story, and even a non-existent narrator.
But if one bears a bookmark in the confidence man's tone, it would be that of Penelope and of the Brothers Bloom.
The Brothers Bloom are Stephen and Bloom, 2 orphan brothers who quickly learn that to survive, they have to become con men. Bloom is a hopeless romantic, and has been seeking an out from the life of con men for a long time. Stephen offers him the perfect last heist, tricking a rich board heiress, Penelope. She falls for it, but not before Bloom falls in love with her. When Bloom has to choose between pulling the heist or being with Penelope, Bloom hesitates and stays with his brother's plan. Penelope leaves disappointed. Eventually, Stephen is kidnapped by criminals and held at ransom. Bloom and Penelope save him, and Bloom leaves, believing him as all his brother's last gift for one wild adventure. Stephen reveals when he was alone that it was all for real.
It's a weird movie, and probably the weakest of Johnson's 5, but still a solid film. It did well critically, and did fine commercially, enough that Johnson was able to get another shot. This is probably the first Rian Johnson film that you've seen, or at least heard of. It's a 2012 action sci-fi movie, and interestingly enough, only cost a little more than Brothers Bloom.
The movie follows Joe, who works as a looper, the guy that kills the people the future mafia members sent back in time. All loopers know that, one day, their future self will come back in time and they'll kill them, closing their loop. When Joe's future self comes back, Joe hesitates and has to track him down. His future self, old Joe, is trying to kill the new head of the mafia, the Rainmaker, as a kid, so the Rainmaker won't one day kill his wife. Present-day Joe finds the Rainmaker as a 5-year-old, before his future self does. Joe sees the growing anger in the boy. When old Joe comes to kill him, he sees how the boy will become the Rainmaker, and Joe turns the gun on himself, preventing old Joe from ever returning in the first place.
Looper is a massive hit. It makes $176 million on its $30 million budget, and ends up on a lot of best sub lists at the time. Presumably, this is what gets the attention of Kathleen Kennedy, who is putting together her new Star Wars movie and needs directors. Johnson has shown himself to both be talented within sci-fi and with pastiche. George Lucas, after all, made Star Wars by putting together his favorite Buck Rogers serials with samurai films, which makes about as much sense as mashing up Dashiell Hammett with high school drama. Look, this movie made over $1 billion. If you've been on the internet in the past 2+ years, you know what it's about. I don't have to describe it to you. Rian Johnson's 2017 film is easily his highest grossing movie and puts him on the map as an up-and-coming director. The cool kids know who directed Looper. Everyone knows who directed The Last Jedi. Finally, in 2019, Rian Johnson released his most recent film, the $40 million murder mystery Knives Out.
Knives Out is the story of Marta Cabrera, the house nurse of mystery novelist Harlan Thrombey. On the night of Harlan's birthday, Marta believes she gave him the wrong medication, causing him to take his own life to prevent Marta's arrest. After his death, famed detective Benoit Blanc is called in to solve the case. With Marta believing herself to be the killer, she helps Benoit as they both slowly discover that Marta may not actually be the one to do it.
Now, there are some loose threads that you can use to connect multiple Rian Johnson films, but there are 3 points I really want to focus in on that really connect all 5 of them: pastiche, memory, and refusal. Pastiche is a revenant remixing of genres or pieces of art. It's often compared to parody and is very similar to it, but where parody is trying to mock a genre, pastiche is trying to pay homage to it and remix it to make it something new.
Brick, Brothers Bloom, Knives Out, and in many ways The Last Jedi are all pastiches of other genres: noir, caper, murder mystery, sci-fi. I think pastiche as a concept is a little hard for some people to grasp. We're far too used to parodies, or worse, the stuff like the Scary Movie knockoffs, that are just people saying pop culture references for like 82 minutes.
I think this can make his movies a little bit confusing. The average audience member could be forgiven for not knowing exactly what to expect from Knives Out. It's a comedy, and a send-up of a very famous genre, but the jokes are rarely, if ever, at the expense of the genre. It's just a funny movie. But what's to say about Johnson himself? I think it's easy to take this negatively, like he has no original ideas. But I think it's just the opposite. Art is never made in a vacuum, and it's all about remixing and rebuilding, and taking your inspirations from the past and making something new with it.
The first wave of film scholars being directors was the New Hollywood movement in the 70s. Scorsese, Spielberg, Coppola, Lucas, and these guys often found ways of honoring their influences. Lucas mashed up a million different serials from his childhood to make Star Wars and Indiana Jones. Spielberg even remade his childhood favorite movie when he made Always. While Johnson's way of homage is slightly different from what they're doing, it's the natural evolution: to take what inspired you and remix it to inspire a new generation. While the influences on Brick and Brothers Bloom are pretty one-to-one, again Dashiell Hammett and Wes Anderson, Last Jedi and Knives Out features countless homages, like Last Jedi's homage to Wings, or Knives Out's small references to sleuth or choose-your-own-adventure novels. Rian Johnson clearly has a fascination with films of the past without a desire to truly recreate them. He wants these genres to grow outward and form new identities. It doesn't feel like a complete coincidence that his 2 most recent movies both take something pretty well established, Star Wars and Who Done It, and modernizes them in unique ways.
Memory and how we interpret it comes up frequently in Rian Johnson's films.
Brick and Knives Out are fairly obvious. Both are murder mysteries, and as such, you have characters telling their sides of the story, often filled with half-truths. This is most noticeable in Knives Out, where each family member retells the night of Harlan's death with slightly different details, but most importantly, each tells it as if they were closest to Harlan. While this could just be a lie, I don't think so. I think it shows that each member of the Thrombey family truly sees the story differently.
This coincides with The Last Jedi, in which Kylo and Luke both retell their versions of that one fateful night.
Luke first lies about it. Then, Kylo tells his incomplete recollection of the night. Then finally, Luke fesses up and admits to the full story. What I love about this is that it would have been so much easier to make Kylo first lie and then Luke tell the truth. But instead, it seems that Kylo is honestly retelling the night as he remembers it. He was just panicked and misremembering. The night is tainted by the heightened nature of the moment. There's no way for Kylo to be objective about it.
Looper deals with memory similarly, where Old Joe knows everything and refuses to share it with the other character, Young Joe.
Old Joe is losing his memories of the life he previously lived, and is gaining the memories of what Young Joe is doing. Additionally, he refuses to tell the Young Joe about his memories, worried that it will prevent the events from coming to pass, or possibly even causing them, something he fears may be worse. While Brothers Bloom doesn't deal with memory per se, it does have Steven constantly lying to Bloom and manipulating the truth around him. He does this to trick Bloom into believing a grand fantasy, a story that Bloom wants to live out. He commits to this to the very end, where he gives Bloom a wonderful grand finale that Bloom thinks is staged, only to find out that it is very, very real.
So what does this mean? What is Rian Johnson getting at with this recurring theme of memory? Well, I think it's most important to note that all of these characters, while not villains, are the antagonists of the story. They're trying to get the protagonist to see the story their way, but it's never out of malicious intent.
Stephen Bloom is trying to improve Bloom's happiness. Old Joe is trying to protect his future wife. Kylo and Luke both want Rey to see the world from their perspective, and the Thrombey family members all want to try to prove that they are the ones Harlan loved the most. Additionally, these characters fully believe their personal truths. The protagonists of the stories are trying to get to the truth of the matter, seeing past the subjectivity of memory. Brennan and Marta are amateur detectives, while young Joe and Rey are lost and trying to deduce what their path forward should be.
I think Johnson is trying to show that seeking the truth is a noble goal, but letting our memories taint us isn't what makes us villains. After all, Luke is the only one to outright lie of these characters, and he's one of the heroes of the story. The villainy of these antagonists come from elsewhere, but not here. I don't think it's that cut and dry in Johnson's mind. All of his films lead up to a single point, a point of no return, that the characters can't turn away from. I understand this could be said for basically every movie, but I think there's something very deep and intentional within Johnson doing this, especially in every movie after Brick. As mentioned before, Brothers Bloom features Bloom choosing between the heist and Penelope, in a scene that very much mirrors Kylo and Rey's discussion on the supremacy.
Let's just go. Please. Please?
The Sith, the Jedi, the rebels, let it all die. Rey, I want you to join me. We can rule together and bring a new order to the galaxy.
Don't do this, Ben. Please don't go this way.
No, you're still holding on!
In both cases, it's the man that makes the wrong choice. Kylo rejects Rey's offer, Bloom goes through with the heist.
In Looper and Knives Out, though, both scenes play to show the character's ability to judge a situation. Joe sees the whole future in front of himself and makes a split-second choice to kill himself to save the future. Marta, without even thinking, attempts to save the other nurse that was drugged by the true killer, even though Marta thinks that the nurse will prove Marta's guilt.
In both these films, this fatal choice comes down to the character understanding the core themes of the film. Looper is all about how fate can be changed, and that's exactly what Joe does. Knives Out is about how kindness can trump all, which Marta demonstrates here.
On the other side of the spectrum, Kylo refuses to learn the message of The Last Jedi, that failure is the greatest teacher. Rey is offering him reconciliation for his past sins, but Kylo can't accept that, and he instead decides to bury himself deeper into those sins. Likewise, Brothers Bloom is about Bloom learning that the randomness of life is what makes it worth living, but he chooses to commit to Steven's ill-advised stories and fantasies. While many films have these sort of fatal turning points, I think Johnson narratively ties them together very well.
To be clear, this isn't all there is to Johnson. He has a bunch of other things. For instance, he's made 2 movies back-to-back about why you shouldn't kill baby Hitler. Both cases is about how the environment leads to it, and you should nurture them from a young age. Point being, these are the 3 that I noticed across all 5, but it's far from his only recurring themes. So, what is Rian Johnson trying to say? I think this is a bit of a cop-out, but I don't think there's any one thing across his 5 films. And I think this is a bigger point about auteurs in general. None of them are hitting the same drum over and over again. I think I pointed to some specific points that keep appearing in a Rian Johnson film, but none of them are his one singular point he keeps trying to make. And I think this is true about any artist. I mentioned Tim Burton earlier, and yes, you can point at his aesthetic or his goths, but they aren't exactly what he's trying to say across every single movie. If there was an auteur that was doing that over and over again and just exploring one single thing, they're probably not a good filmmaker.